Hi, everyone, again. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we'll be talking about fraud and all of its associated costs, beyond just chargebacks, how they're eating into your profits, and then, of course, hopefully leave you with a set of actionable items that you can take today to start mitigating some of these costs. So by way of a quick introduction, I'm Cathy. I am the head of our fraud protection product, Bolt Approve, here at Bolt. I first stumbled into e-commerce fraud working for a company called Blackhawk Network, and they own a site called giftcards.com, which, no surprise, sells gift cards online. As some of you might be able to imagine, gift cards are some of the most highly frauded items out there, and this was kind of a constant pain point that the company had to battle with. And at a certain time, fraud losses were in the high single-digit percentages of their business. So they spent a lot of time building a tool to be able to manage that. And that same technology is the core of the Bolt fraud product as well. So a little bit of history there. And before that, I spent some time at the Boston Consulting Group in financial services as well. And a quick introduction about Bolt. For those of you who aren't familiar, Bolt is a checkout experience platform. And what we do here is we make it easier, faster, and safer for your shoppers to complete a purchase on your site. Research shows that a lot of customers will abandon at that last moment because of a poor checkout experience, and that's the pain point that Bolt serves to address. And in doing that, we have a suite of products. The one that we'll be focusing on today is, of course, the fraud prevention aspect. And our real differentiator here is the level of behavioral data that we're able to collect from your shoppers. So we're able to follow them throughout the entire purchasing journey on your site and make our decisions as to whether or not we think this is a good shopper or a fraudulent actor based on all of those data points, in addition to some of the regular ones that our competitors might be looking at as well. And combining both checkout and fraud is how we're able to get these insights and deliver the great approval results that we have. And our whole approach is really approval focused and thinking about looking at signs of good orders rather than signs of bad orders. And you'll kind of see that as a common thread throughout our discussion today. And we believe in it so much that we named our product Bolt Approve. All right, so jumping in to recap the goals for today, we want to spend about 30 minutes rolling through the slides. And then at any time, if you have questions, there should be a Q&A box at the bottom, and you can feel free to throw those in there. We'll leave the last 15 minutes or so to address those questions live. But if anything comes up after the presentation today, please feel free to reach out. We love talking about fraud, so we'll be happy to jump on the phone and go into a further discussion with you. But for today, we've got 3 goals. The first is understanding how fraud is really impacting your bottom line, right? Starting with chargebacks, but what are all of these other cost drivers, and how do you get to a dollar amount? And then once we go through that equation, we'll actually deep dive into each of the 4 main buckets of cost drivers and show you a couple ways of how they might appear in your business. And lastly, of course, we want to leave you with some actions that you can take today to begin to offset these costs. So to kick off, what is fraud really costing your business, right? And we put this little graphic here to show that chargebacks are just the tip of the iceberg. It's what businesses see, and you have that annoying line on your payment statement every single month to see the dollars that you're losing. But really, there's a lot more than that as well under the water. Some of the biggest buckets are your lost revenue through false declines, and this is what we're going to spend most of our time on today. But what this is referring to is, as your business grows and maybe first you have no fraud, and as you're doing a bit more revenue, fraudsters discover your site, and maybe they start to attack your site. And all of a sudden, you have to start reviewing these orders, maybe yourself. But as that revenue continues to grow, that fraud continues to grow as well. And then all of a sudden, maybe you can't even review all those orders yourself anymore. And then you have to start hiring other folks or adapting some rules to be able to trim down the amount of orders that you actually have to look at. And what happens in this process is in trying to block out these bad actors, you end up accidentally blocking out some of your good shoppers as well. So that's what we're calling a false decline or lost revenue. And you can imagine that this is going to be the most painful thing, right? Because you have spent so much money on ads, marketing, getting people to the site, only to accidentally block them at that very, very last minute. So this is the true cost of fraud, and we'll spend a bit more time on that. The third one is about customer lifetime value. So the value of your customer isn't just that first purchase, right? Most of the times, and our hope is that they're going to come back and order again and again and again. And beyond those future orders, they're also, they have referral value and review value. And you want to really make sure that your brand is resonating with them in a really great way. The worst thing, in my opinion, that you can do for brand is put a great customer through layers and layers of identity review to try to verify if they're a good customer. So that can be damaging to how they perceive your brand and when they make that decision to buy again, where they go. And the last thing is, of course, the time and resources on your team to manage fraud and review these orders. A lot of those can be kind of buried costs, but when you really take a look at it, it can really stack up as well. So we put together a nice equation for you, a quick build on kind of a back of the envelope estimate of how much you're really paying for fraud. And the short of it is that for every $1 of fraud chargebacks, the total cost of fraud is going to be about $4 to $5. And we break them up into those 4 categories that we just talked about as well. In short, there's going to be the order cost, right? And what this means is when you have a chargeback, you are paying for that total cost of the order. However, the cost to your business is actually a little bit less than that, which is good news. And the reason for that is because you're only losing the value of the good, right? And all that margin you were making, you're not making the margin, but you didn't really lose it either. Next is this category of false declines. And you can see, right, compared to the cost of the order, the cost of the false declines is much, much bigger. So, and the reason for that is we believe that most businesses are really being quite conservative when they think about what to block. And as a result, they're actually letting a lot of these happen. The third, as we said, is that lifetime value. What do we estimate is the long-term value that you might be losing out on from a poor fraud verification process. And then lastly, of course, the time and resources to your team, which we're going to estimate is about 50 cents per dollar of chargebacks. And that kind of lands you in the $4 to $5 range. Of course, this is going to really depend on your business, what you're doing today, if you're doing it all yourself, if you have some tools already. And actually, to get a better sense of that, our team built a pretty lightweight tool to help you guys do a quick a better estimate than this for your business, which you can check out at bolt.com/fraud-calculator. The link is down there at the bottom. You put in a little bit of information about your business, and we'll do a nice estimate for you on what we think your cost of fraud is. And of course, if you have further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Okay, so next we're going to dig into each of those 4 categories, help you understand those a little bit better, and then of course leave you with some tips on how to address each of these. So first off, what we said, right, was that chargeback order cost, and how do I know what I'm actually losing, right? And so the breakdown of those cost items that you're really losing are the lost item that you're not going to get back because now it's with the fraudster. That tends to be 20 to 40% of the total sale price, depending on what you're selling. The fulfillment cost, the cost to ship that order, you're not going to get that back either. That tends to be about 10 to 15% of the sale price. And then the transaction fees that you're paying for your payment processor and all that associated good stuff. And that tends to be about 3 to 5% of the total sale price. So add those all up, and that's where you get to about 60% of the item being the cost on per chargeback. Okay, so let's get into how to start reducing these, right? And there's going to be really two things that you can do, and this is pretty basic, so bear with me. I promise it's going to get a little meatier. The first is, of course, you can detect the fraud before the order is even shipped, and that's great. And then the next one that we'll talk about is then what happens after the chargeback comes back, because as a retailer, you still have a bit of recourse there. So we'll go into each of these. I'll spin through these quickly, right? You've got the things that you should do immediately is start researching the customer. And this sounds intuitive, but a lot of people just look at the data that they're getting from the order, and really that's just the tip of the iceberg. And there's so much more that you can find out by just doing a little Facebook search, a little Google search, and that's what we recommend, that where you start if you haven't already. The second is to start focusing on the orders that matter, because the reality is fraud is actually true fraud is a small percentage of the overall transactions, right? We estimate it to be about 1% across the industry. Of course, could be more if you're selling very expensive resellable items. But the thing to remember is most of your orders are going to be good. So rather than divvying up your time evenly across all of them, it's really to your advantage to be able to knock out the ones that are obviously good, maybe repeat shoppers who and just focus on the ones that are the most risky, maybe the highest dollar or the ones shipping to the most suspicious areas. And then the third one is, once you know someone is a bad actor, it's really prudent to start putting together a blacklist so that that if they come in again to block them from ordering. And this is actually key because fraudsters are so smart, and if they attempt an order with you and it goes through, they will 9 times out of 10 come back and try it again. So, let that first chargeback be a big lesson to you and block them right away so that when they do come back, they won't be successful the second time. And of course, all of these can really stack up, especially considering all of the hundreds of other things that you have to do to run your business. So when it all gets too much, consider a managed fraud solution. Okay, so what happens then once that chargeback comes in, right? And a lot of times we will see a good portion of fraud chargebacks as friendly fraud. And what this means is, someone trying to get a freebie and claiming that they don't recognize the transaction when maybe it was them that placed it. So in these cases, evidence is key, right? Look for signs that they are abusing the system. The payments info, the AVS results. If you have a good AVS match, that's a great indicator that this could be friendly fraud. And then also keep your post-order information. So delivery confirmations, order confirmations, invoices, all of those are great ammo to have in forming a strong argument. And then, of course, any customer communications with your brand, whether with your support on your social media, even records that they bought something from you in store. All of these are great angles to be able to further bolster your argument. And if this is something that you're more interested in, on the Bolt website and the resources page, we have a lot of great content about how to represent chargebacks. So make sure to check that out as well. Okay, second bucket. So the false declines, and this one, if you can't tell already, is really, I think, where it's going to hurt your business the most. So again, false declines occur when we unintentionally block good customers while trying to block bad customers, right? And this is going to be most common if you have some kind of rules-based system going on, because blanket rules really miss a lot of the details that might differentiate a good shopper from a bad shopper. The other interesting thing to note is false declines and your chargebacks are actually kind of inversely related. So if you have a ton of chargebacks, you might actually not have as big of a false decline problem because you're not declining quite as much, right? Versus if you've got no chargebacks, you probably are falsely declining a lot because you're so conservative with what you're letting through that you're probably also blocking some of these bad actors. So that's kind of an interesting push-pull dynamic to think of. And then, so take a scenario on the right here, right? If we've got 7 good shoppers coming to your site, you've got a fraud filter, either a tool, a scoring system, or a person doing these reviews, and they're scanning these orders, and of the 7, they decide to block 3, they let 4 through. What this means is, great, one of these 7 was a true fraudster, and you block them, and that's a real fraud event that you decline, rightfully so. But in doing that, you also accidentally blocked 2 good shoppers, and those are your 2 false declines. So this is the dynamic, but of course at a much bigger scale that we're going to be talking about today. So people often ask, what percentage of total declines are false declines? And of course, again, it ranges based on what you're doing today, but we estimate on average, if you're not using a managed fraud solution, that can be about 70%. So I encourage you to take a good hard look at how many orders you're declining today. If it's anything over 1%, those are probably false declines. All right, so how do we then start making sure that we approve legitimate customers? And this is what we call the Bolt mindset shift, right? And kind of what I mentioned in the beginning, it's about looking for signs of good to say yes, rather than signs of bad to say no. And it starts with thinking about legitimate shopping behavior. So a lot of these, kind of heuristics out there of, okay, if someone's using a masked IP address, a proxy, it's probably a bad order. But in reality, there's a lot of scenarios where a masked IP address could make sense, right? For example, if you're selling a lot of B2B items, a lot of companies use corporate IPs. So if you have that lens in mind, then that common wisdom might not make that much sense. Another example is the notorious billing shipping address mismatch. And again, common wisdom tells you that if it's not shipping to the billing address, maybe this is fraud. However, in this day and age, there's so much gifting, right? So if you can piece together that this order might be a gift and you can connect the person buying with the person receiving, then maybe even that billing and shipping mismatch is okay as well. And then the last one is a nice tip and trick that we like here, which is wallet payments. And what I mean by that is your Apple Pays and your Google Pays, because a fraudster isn't going to take the time to set up all these stolen credit cards and Apple Pay. So we find those to be relatively safe. All right, the second category of reasons or of ways to say yes then no is thinking about that online social footprint. And we talked about this a little bit earlier in the presentation, but in this day and age, there's so much that you can find out about a person online. So, again, start with a quick Facebook search and you'll kind of be surprised with what you can find. One of our best examples is we have a retailer who is one of our customers. They sell very, very expensive audio equipment. And and the fraudsters kind of attacking their business were very sophisticated too. So for a while, we were still seeing a lot of fraud. And where we ultimately found the nut to crack was that a lot of their good customers were such like passionate music lovers that they would have SoundCloud profiles that were really richly built out. And that became the signal of good, right? Like if we saw someone with that, clearly a music lover in their online footprint, then we felt comfortable pushing that order through. So that's just one example. And then the second one is going to be on the identity and the destination relationship. So if you can tell that someone is ordering from one place but shipping to another place, and that doesn't really make sense, then through, again, some of these online social footprints, you might be able to find, they're shipping to a place, their hometown, which you can see on Facebook again. And connecting those dots, right, is just another way to piece together why this order from this shopper is good rather than bad. Okay, so onto that third bucket then around customer lifetime value. And what we believe is that fraud verification or identity verification can be the enemy of a great customer experience. And you don't want preventing fraud to be the reason why your customers don't want to shop again with your brand. And just to throw an example out there, right? If you think about some of the worst shopping experiences you can have, it's when you've placed an order and now someone's calling you up, sending you emails, asking for, a photo of your driver's license, your social security number, your birth certificate, whatever, right? And you've got to jump through 5 or 6 hoops to be able to verify your order. That's going to be such a, high friction experience that the next time you want to buy something, you're probably going to say, okay, let me check out a different store, and maybe they won't put me through hell to get my order through. So the whole theme then of how to address this is then verification without friction. So the idea is, speed is everything today, and especially in the age of Amazon Prime, everyone here is well aware that our customers expect their orders, today. So one way to just quickly make sure that we're not adding additional friction is to prioritize the order review, and especially near the daily shipping cutoff, because you don't want fraud review to be the reason why the order is pushed to the next day, right? So really making sure that we look at those immediately as they come in rather than batch processing them at the end of the day. And a great way to incentivize the folks doing this is a turnaround time goal, so to measure that. And you can often set that up in your shopping cart, in a BigCommerce or a Magento, something like that. And then lastly, if you're really seeing a lot of volume, a first step could be to use a fraud scoring tool so that they can give you a quick sense of what might be good, what might be bad, and then you can prioritize those highest risk orders to get those out the door as well. Okay, and then the next one is keeping verification behind the scenes. And this kind of alludes to what I was talking about earlier with the more that you make a shopper aware that they are being verified, the worse that experience is. So the more that you can do behind the scenes, the better that experience is going to be for the shopper. So what we suggest is use a lot of third-party tools, right? We talked about social media already, but there is also a lot of different search tools that you can find online, white pages, right? Those are a place to start. And exhaust those before you go to call the customer, because that should be really like the last resort. And then the second is, if you haven't already, right, use tracking pixels. If you can follow that customer and know, have they been browsing, which is a really good sign of a good customer. Where are they visiting from, right? Did they click on one of your ads? Another really good sign of a customer. And use those hints, which you don't need to talk to the customer to get those, and start there. before you go out and email them. And this is actually something that Bolt we do here in our product, and we've actually taken it to the extreme, where because of all of these behind the scenes data points that we're collecting, we have in our checkout flow negated the need for a full billing address. You know, we often find that billing address entry is another, I don't know, 7 or 8 fields, and it could be a reason why someone abandons. So even something like billing address, which is really used for AVS and for fraud protection, we've now eliminated the need for that. And we're able to now dynamically serve fields based on the riskiness of your shopper, and you know, if we think someone's really safe, we're going to ask them the least amount of information possible to get them through, versus if you're a business that might be selling something a bit more risky, we can include things like billing zip or CVV as well. Okay, last bucket, since we've got just a few minutes left in the first 30, is time and resources for your team. So you know, reviewing orders it can be time consuming to get it right, especially those trickiest fraud orders. And actually the bigger pain point around fraud review is more scalability, right? You've got, rarely do businesses have like an even flow of orders throughout the months of the year. What I'm alluding to, of course, is holiday, or as we recently saw with a scenario like COVID, that can really throw off your whole game plan, right? So taking that into mind, we estimate the cost per review at about $1 per order reviewed. And right, so as more and more orders start coming in, if you have to keep looking at every single order, that can quickly add up. All right, so how do we think about increasing that operational efficiency, right? And it really comes down to, you've got 2 levers, training and automation, right? So if you haven't already, start with training. I think fraud is such a complex beast that it really takes a long time for someone to ramp up and to start really understanding fraud. So what we suggest is start documenting as quickly as possible and get those you know, key attributes that make sense for your business, and make sure to jot those down so that everyone at the company knows what fraud looks like for you. And then start to build in an escalation system too, right? So that maybe the majority of orders can be reviewed by one person, but then you kick up the most risky orders to someone who's a bit more experienced, who can take a second look at that. And then the second is, again, automation, right? Like, once you get to a certain scale, it's really just not sustainable to look at every single order. And at that point, you've got a few options. You've got some free tools built into your e-commerce platform or your payment gateway, and you can start there. However, again, the risk with some of those is you add some rules and you start to see more of those false declines that we talked about earlier. Or you can contract yourself and start building some, you know, homegrown sets of rules to start approving some of those low risk orders as well. All right, so to wrap up now, since we're right at about time, we wanted to summarize the 5 takeaways from today's presentation, and then after this, we'll hop into the Q&A. I see that there were a few questions. So to start is, if nothing else, the thing to remember today is prioritize approving those legitimate customers. As we saw through this whole presentation, that's actually where most of the cost of fraud is today. And it's, you know, not the most apparent thing, but that's going to be the biggest opportunity for your business, right? Getting that right could mean more revenue for you right away. And who doesn't like more revenue? To do that, we recommend, you know, thinking about what a legitimate shopping behavior looks like for your business. And this is going to be different depending on what you're selling, what you sell, and who you're selling to. The third is avoid that high friction verification, right? If you can get around calling the customer and asking for a bunch of documentation, do that, because this is really damaging to the brand perception, and it's the last thing that you want. It might not be worth it, right? And fourth is, as you're scaling up, think about automation first. And then ultimately, if that's not enough, the fifth is consider, of course, a managed fraud solution. We'd be very happy to talk to you about that. But when the time is right. So thank you guys again for sitting with us through this chat today about fraud prevention. And with that, let me take a look at the Q&A. Bear with me a second. Okay. First question was, okay, we use a combination of a fraud scoring tool and an in-house manual review. When we initially started, this seemed to work well, but as we've grown, we've needed to bring on additional folks. How do we know when it's time to think about outsourcing? Okay, great question. So this is, it's again gonna differ for every business, but ultimately it's when you start to feel that it's too much, right? And that's kind of when you really should start thinking about what else is out there. We think that fraud is something, unfortunately, that every business has to deal with, but it's more of like a necessary chore rather than something that's gonna really grow your business or be accretive to your brand. So we would suggest outsourcing it as soon as possible. If you use a provider like Bolt, we charge on a per transaction level, and we only charge for orders that we end up approving. So it scales up really nicely. There's going to be no sense of like, oh, I overbought, right? Like if you're doing fewer orders, we're going to score fewer orders and charge you less. If you're doing more, we're going to grow with you. So the beauty of that is that these outsourced solutions grow with your business and kind of follow that trajectory really nicely. Another kind of good kind of finger in the air estimate is once you get to about one full-time dedicated person looking at orders all the time, that's also probably a good indicator that it's time to start going outsourced. Because at that point, you run into issues of what if this person goes on holiday, right? And they're not available to work. How are you going to have that backup? And these are all things, again, that you probably don't want to be worrying about. So, yeah, with outsourcing, you can focus on what's most important for your business, which is creating great products and selling them and delivering a great experience to your customers. All right, so the second one is, a question about where can I find the resources related to fraud available? And let's see. So the first one that I mentioned was the fraud calculator, which is bolt.com/fraud-calculator. But we also have actually right up here, bolt.com/resources. And you'll see a section for approve, which is our fraud content. And you can browse through there. We've got a lot of content about all aspects of fraud, right? Starting from how to detect fraud to how to fight chargebacks on the back end. A lot of these tips and tricks for how to identify good customer behavior. So it could be a good starting point. So with that, then it looks like there are no other questions for now. But of course, if anything else does come up, please feel free to send me an email. I'm Cathy with a C @bolt.com, and look forward to speaking soon. Thank you, guys.